there.
You good there? All right. I recently read a book called The Gales of November. It's about the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which growing up, I know, born at the end of the 60s, but growing up in the 70s, we always heard the song from Gordon Lightfoot, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which is an amazing song. And obviously the book is going to go into the details about that. It was really a lot of background information about the construction of the boat and then the inner lives of all the 30-plus sailors that were on it. But the, I guess, brand new information that I had never considered that came to my mind was that sailing on the Great Lakes is more difficult than sailing in the ocean, which I never would have thought that. And so they talked about lakers, the guys that are always, in the Great Lakes, and then people who sail on the ocean commercially. And every once in a while, someone from the ocean will have to come into Great Lakes, and then they find out, hey, this is way different. And so it was interesting to me that it took more skill, and it was more difficult and more dangerous to be a shipping sailor on the Great Lakes. And so I think about that as we're going to go into Mark chapter 4 today. We're going to finish Mark chapter 4. And everyone here, I think, is familiar with the miracle, the background where Jesus is with the disciples, and the great storm arises, and Jesus is sound asleep, and typically, we think of a calm lake, like over here, Duck Island. But actually, the Sea of Galilee, which is the Lake of Tiberias to the people at that time, was known for immediate rapid storms. So there's desert off to one side, and as the heat from the desert would generate updrafts and currents, when those winds would hit the Sea of Galilee, the Lake of Tiberias, causes great storms, or the winds that came down from the mountains. So the weather, the atmosphere would change, and it was really common for ships to sink. And archaeologists to this day are still finding ships that they're digging up and that we're looking into, and we're learning more. So let's see if we can read the text out here. So pay close attention to how Mark phrases this, because I think it gives us a little bit of heft, a little bit of clout to the passage. Look at the beginning. On that day when evening had come, he said to them, let's go across to the other side. To me, that lends a little bit of first-hand eyewitness credibility. So it's a particular day, it's a particular time of day, and Mark is giving us that little bit of tidbit of more detail, and we read it and say, okay, this sounds like someone who was there, right? And so, verse 36, and leaving the crowd, they took with him in the boat just as he was. I've never really noticed that until this week as I was working on the sermon. And I don't know why that phrase stuck out to me so greatly. But all through the first 4 chapters of Mark, it seems like, if I'm remembering correctly, there's the crowds. That phrase is repeated, oxlos, the crowds, right? So they're seeing the healing, they're hearing the teaching, all of this is focused on the crowds. And now we're going to have this miracle that we're all so familiar with, and it's focused just on the disciples. So I think that should cause us to ask the question, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of the miracle, and why is it just for the disciples? And why did it take him just as he is, right? Just as he was. He gets in the book. Does that mean just as he was because he's exhausted from so much, he's performed miracles, he's been preaching and he's teaching? Is it that he's exhausted from the conflict? Because remember, in the last chapter and a half, he's starting to get some pushback from the people. Now, who are you to heal on the Sabbath? That's been a big controversy that we've looked at. Who are you to say your sins are forgiven? All this. So, just as he was he frustrated? Was Jesus cranky? Right? I mean, we will read in Mark's gospel the actual word anger, right? Jesus looks at the crowd and he's angry. So is Jesus hangry, right? Maybe he's behind on his sleep. Maybe just as he was means he wasn't prepared. He didn't bring a toothbrush, an overnight bag, and you're like, well, okay, hop on the boat. Yeah, no rain jacket, Jim. I love it. Yeah, right? So no rain jacket. Or was it just as he was because he's a carpenter? We stop to forget. He probably did some concrete. I'm just going to throw that out there. Because carpenters at that time, they did everything. They did the whole structure, right? Was it that Jesus is a landlubber, right? He's not initiated. He's not part of the crew. He doesn't know, what good is he on the boat? We'll bring him anyway, right? So he's going to get on the boat just as he was. And I don't know. That phrase this week has just lodged in my mind. And it's like, why did you throw that in there, Mark? Because you didn't explain it. You didn't give any details. But here he is. He's out there. And we don't know. I think about him being on the boat and not being able to help because he's a carpenter. Right? When we pour concrete and there's a crew that has a couple of guys that don't know what they're doing, but someone thinks, oh, we need more people in the pour so that it can go up, it's always worse. The people that don't know what they're doing, when they get in there, they are always in the way. And so like when I'm pumping concrete, I've got a rope I tie to my hose, I put my foot on it, and I'll move it around, and inevitably, the guys that don't know what they're doing, they always back up and they get a boot full of concrete, and then they look at me and I'm the bad guy, So, I don't know. The disciples were like, well, just as he is, and we'll take him. Right? So also, what I found to be interesting is, and I'm sure most of us here have read the Gospel of Mark, so we know that the boat's going to make it to the other side, right? There's no spoiler there. But look at this. So, a great windstorm arose, but what happened before that? And other boats were with him. Jesus is so popular, Jesus is so interesting, when he gets in the boat to go to the other side, everybody that's got a boat's like, come on, let's go. And I think of that movie Dunkirk, where they ship everyone back and forth. So I'm thinking this huge armada, right? And they're all following Jesus. We know the storm arises, but when you get to chapter 5 and they're on the other side, no mention of the other boats. Did they not make it? I'm going to guess, Mark doesn't tell us, but I'm going to guess they probably didn't make it. So look at chapter 5 and look at when they dock and they get off, and you won't see. There's probably a lesson that I don't grasp fully. There's probably a moral of the story here that all of these people jump in the boat and make the effort to follow Jesus in the absence of begging, in the absence of pleading, in the absence of persuasion. Neither Jesus nor the disciples nor anyone that's Team Jesus says to the guys on shore, hey, Jesus has something you need. Jesus is essential for your salvation. Jesus is nothing. There's a story there, sure, but there's a message there, there's a lesson there. And it doesn't mean when we're evangelistic that we're silent. Right? It doesn't mean that we don't ever engage people. But there's something, evangelism, sharing the good news, introducing people to you. So there's something about the person of Jesus that speaks loud enough that these folks found it interesting enough that they wanted to get in the boat and they wanted to follow him. But there was none of the hype, none of the promise, none of the, oh, your life is going to be better. There was something that was in the person of Jesus that spoke loud enough that people became interested and they went to the effort. And I don't know exactly what the application is for us in the church today, but there's something that we need to let kind of stew in the back of our mind. What was it that caused people to voluntarily jump in the boat and follow? There's something there. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's worth thinking about. Did you guys have a good 4th last week?
Yeah.
I mean, I love 250 years. That's a quarter of a millennium. Very exciting. I can remember being in grade school when it was the bicentennial, way before you guys came. I mean, we had quarters with the 1776, 1976, and we had parades. It was big, it was huge, all the TV commercials, all that. And so for our 4th of July celebration, a very special family in our life, the Kaufmans, you guys know the Navy family. Their daughter Alyssa wrote Tammy and I a handwritten letter, having a baby shower, please come visit. So we go there, bypass through Monticello on the way there, which is, I highly recommend that. Anyway, so I'm talking with my buddy Frank about ship life. And I'm always interested in stuff like that. And so, I don't know why I was curious about the sleeping arrangements, and I misspoke by asking about the bunks. He politely corrected me, it's called a rack. But here's what was interesting to me. I was like, basically what are the dimensions, what is that? And Frank said what the first thing he did when he got to where the racks were, is he would hold up his arm. And he said basically it's from his elbow to his fingertip. And sometimes, Jim, did you ever sleep in a rack?
5 high.
5 times?
5 high.
Oh, 5 high, right, okay, yeah. Frank said he liked the top one because you had a little bit more space because the ceiling's up there. You don't want to be on the bottom one because everyone's stepping on you. But he tells me this. If you want to flip over in the rack, you got to get out. Yeah, Lord's like, nope, not going to happen. And of course, my heart, as he's telling this, is like getting tighter because I'm so claustrophobic, I could never do it. He says you got to get out and then flip over and get back in. Jim, maybe he weighed a little more than you, okay? So, it did 2 things for me. Number one, it made me appreciate the sacrifices that people make, when they're in our military, and just to appreciate our military just more, to be able to sleep like that. If you're underway for 9 months or whatever, I probably would never sleep. I mean, that would be, I couldn't do it, right? And he said something about like some kind of like seatbelt or something when it's heavy seas, so you don't fall out. But think about it, that's your life. And it is possible to sleep when you're on a boat in the storm. Because we look at this idea of Jesus, he didn't have a seatbelt, he's not trapped in a rack, but he's sound asleep on the cushion. That's a big, big, big part of this story, right? How did he sleep through the storm? How on earth do you sleep when probably ships are being sunk around you? It's crazy waves, probably lightning and thunder, the whole ball of wax. Now, before I go into how and why I think he is asleep, look at verse 37. Great windstorm arose, the waves were breaking over the boat so that the boat was already filling. All right, so we know these boats are about 30 foot long from what we've dug up with archaeologists. We know they're about 10 foot, 9.5, 10 foot wide. And so they're going to have sides on them that the waves are crashing over. And it's starting to fill up. And what happens when boats have water inside instead of out? It's going to be bad. We look at that and we make a huge mistake. At least we're tempted. We water down this passage. The pun was intended. We water down the passage and we tritely say, this is about the storms of life. Jesus is with you in the storms of life. You got fired, the factory closed down, your friend betrayed you, whatever obstacle is hit you in life. And this is not about the storms of life. This is not a metaphor. It's not an analogy for when times are tough. Those do hit us. If it were about that, then it would almost be useless to us. Because the lesson that's behind it is so much stronger than, oh, this is the storms of life. That it doesn't do it justice, and I'll tell you why here. The seriousness of the storm, we don't want to make it a cliche, right? The storms of life. The seriousness of the storms didn't outweigh the exhaustion of Jesus. Now, why is that even important? Your faith, and I'll go as far, without exaggerating, to say your eternity hinges on this. The fact that Jesus is exhausted is one of these, this whole miracle story is one of these ideas that merge seamlessly the idea that Jesus is fully human and fully God. If he was not fully human, his death on the cross couldn't replace ours. Right? The sacrifice on the cross requires a sinless human. And the fact that he's so exhausted from his traveling ministry, from the conflict, from the frustration, whatever it was, all the motion of the boat, the high waves, the high ocean, all of these things shows that he's fully human, which is necessary. And how was he woken up? I love this part, with a rebuke. He was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and they said, basically, you don't care a thing about us, do you? Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? It's an accusation. You're inconsiderate. We're here bucketing out water, rowing for our lives. We're panicking, and you're sound asleep. And so Jesus rebukes it, right? He says, and he awoke and he rebuked the winds and said, peace, be still. That's not the word for peace, Irene, that we normally think of. It's more of a word in the Greek to be silent. So, hush, hush, be still. And the winds ceased, and there was a great calm. So it went from ultimate chaos to a peaceful, straight-up calm. And so, there again, remember, this is where the deity and the humanity merge simultaneously. But there's a big insight there. And I think one that, for me, I think it encourages people at different seasons of your life, at different times of your life, or whatever. And they wake Jesus up, they accuse him, right, basically of not caring. And he responds to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? The encouragement is faithlessness is not the same as being unfaithful. Lack of faith, listen to me carefully, having doubts, having concerns, struggling to trust God, even when he's right there with you, that's not the same as being unfaithful. Now, being unfaithful would have been like the story that may come to your mind when you read this of Jonah, right? There are some similarities in the story. And how do they treat Jonah in that story? They pitch him overboard, right? Jonah says, this is all because of me, right? And so, to make God happy, you've got to throw me over. That would be unfaithful, right? But pitching a fit, instead of pitching Jesus overboard, pitching a fit due to our circumstances, listen, that's human nature. We're trapped in this flesh. That's part of humanity. So, to have doubts or to struggle in your faith doesn't disqualify you. It doesn't make you someone who is unfaithful. It simply makes you someone who is human. All right. What's the result for them? Jesus confronts them, and they were filled with great fear and said to one another, Who then is this that even the winds and the sea obey him? What's the result? Was it an increase in their faith? That's not obvious here, is it, right? Awe, being impressed, that comes easily, right? He performs the miracle, the wonder, the awe, that's easy. True faith, not so much. We can beat ourselves up over the fact that our faith isn't as strong as it ought to be, or it's not as strong as so-and-so, or all of this. These are people right in the proximity of Jesus. They're hearing him directly. They're watching him. They see the exorcisms. They see the miracles. They see it all, and they still are clueless at times. But I think we should give ourselves a little bit of slack when we kind of feel like our faith isn't as great as it should be. Faith is an absent part of our makeup when fear takes over. That's what Jesus says. What are you afraid of? Don't you have enough faith, basically, right? Why is that? Fear does several things to us. It distracts us from what's important. It discourages us. We're overwhelmed by our fears. It disorients us. It's probably the biggest distraction that any of us have. And Jesus recognizes, and he doesn't say, okay, out of the boat. You weren't faithful enough. Get thee away from me, Satan. He doesn't do any of that. So the question that I want to ask myself as I look at this miracle, that I'll just offer for your personal consideration, is which do you want to allow? Because Jesus definitely makes this a personal choice. Which do you want to allow to have more power over your life? Fear or faith? I got it. All right, Matthew, are you ready? All right, let's